I had always found solace in routines, the predictability of life giving me a sense of control. My days typically began with the grind of paperwork at Tyndall Manufacturing, a company my family had built over generations. But my true escape was my backyard. It wasn't just land to me, it was a sanctuary where I could step away from numbers and negotiations, a place to reconnect with something simpler. That Friday morning, though, my life was anything but routine. Little did I know, the events that would unfold later that day would shatter any semblance of stability I had built. It started with something ordinary, dropping off my car for repairs. The mechanic, an old friend of the family, offered to drop me home instead of the usual back and forth. It seemed like a harmless decision at the time, a choice made for convenience rather than necessity. The warm sun and the promise of a quiet afternoon tending to the yard convinced me to accept his offer. It felt like a good day, a chance to unwind. But as it turned out, fate had other plans, unraveling secrets I could never have anticipated. The air was mild and inviting that Friday afternoon, the kind of day that encouraged procrastination. After leaving my car at the shop for some much-needed repairs, I decided to forgo the hassle of returning to the office. The mechanic, always eager to help, suggested dropping me off at home and promised to deliver the car by evening. Standing in my yard under the bright sky with a rake in hand, I considered the tasks ahead, nothing pressing, just the sort of mundane chores that kept my mind occupied. Little did I know those few hours of tranquility would soon give way to revelations that would shake the foundation of my world. We've got a pretty big backyard, and I was near the edge, cleaning up some leaves, when I saw my brother's red Corvette roll into the driveway. Perfect, I thought. He only ever shows up here when he wants to borrow something and never brings it back. As I walked toward the driveway, I heard my son Sam yell out, "Hey, Dad, what's got you visiting the land of losers?" Dad? Why did Sam call my brother Dad? And what on earth did he mean by land of losers? My brother chimed in, "I'm just dropping off Uncle Joe's circular saw. I messed up the power cord. He needs to fix it so I can finish my project at home. Is the old man around?" The old man? My name's Joe, and I wouldn't exactly call myself clueless. But maybe I am? Should I just stay out of the way and listen to what's happening here? Naturally, I turned on my phone to record the conversation. Sam shot back, "Clueless isn't here. He doesn't usually show up before 5, and honestly, I try to avoid him. So no, I don't think he's around. But hey, since school's out, when can I come and stay at your place? It's way more fun there than here. I'd love to have you over, but your mom wants to spend as much time with you as she can. You're her only kid, and when you're gone, she'll be lonely. So give her some space on this. She's supposed to meet me Thursday afternoon so we can talk about you staying with me for a week or two this summer." Then Sam asked, "Why doesn't Mom just divorce Clueless and move in with you?" I had no idea she'd been spending regular afternoons at my brother's. Oh no, things were starting to click into place and none of it felt right. Maybe I am clueless after all. Eric proudly added, "Since I got her pregnant with you, I've been asking her about that every month. She always says, 'You're a great lay, but you'd make a terrible husband.' I have a husband I adore and cherish. Every moment with him feels like I'm the luckiest woman alive. Sure, my peaks with you are mind-blowing, but he makes me feel loved. I love him, and I don't love you. And that, son," my brother continued, "is why she won't divorce Joe Tyndall, but still hooks up with Eric Tyndall now and then. Anyway, I've got to get going. I'll see you tomorrow at your grandparents' place for the annual birthday and Memorial Day party." I felt my legs turn to jelly as I slowly sank to the ground, sliding down the side of the garage and landing in the hosta patch. It felt as if my whole world had just crumbled. The realization that my son wasn't truly mine by blood was a blow I could hardly process. But the bigger shock was discovering that my wife had not only gotten pregnant by my brother, but that she'd been sleeping with him regularly. It was more than I could bear. I somehow managed to stumble back to where I'd been working and collapsed onto the old rope swing, the same swing I had spent countless hours pushing my son on, watching him laugh and enjoy every moment. I sat there, overwhelmed, tears falling until they pooled into the mud beneath me. What was I supposed to do now? Before I made any decisions, I needed to understand the full scope of the situation. Then it hit me, my only hope for answers: the DNA test. A few years ago, Carol, Sam, and I had all taken the 23andMe test. How could the results be wrong? But then a thought struck me. What if Carol had discarded my sample and replaced it with Eric's? If she had, she could easily have hidden the truth about Sam's parentage. That would be one of the most vile betrayals imaginable. Stealing away my legacy and replacing it with the blood of that bastard. Denying me the truth about a child I loved like my own. Once that thought crossed my mind, the possibility of redemption slipped away, and I knew I needed to confront my current reality. I'm Joe Tyndall, 43 years old. My weight hasn't changed much since my college days, still around 175 pounds. I'm lean, never much of an athlete in school, though I did run track and was good at long-distance events. Now the runs I used to enjoy have become a rare occurrence, often interrupted by family and work. But I still manage to get out for a few miles each week, sometimes even running in charity races like 5Ks and 10Ks. As for my job, I hold the dual titles of Chief Financial Officer and Chief Operating Officer at Tyndall's Machine Company in my hometown. The company has been in my family for generations, starting with my great-grandfather, who was a blacksmith making plowshares and putting iron rims on wooden wagon wheels. My grandfather and father followed in his footsteps, each adding modern metalworking technology to the business. Now, we specialize in manufacturing precision parts for the aerospace industry and providing metal replacement parts for various sectors. My father, Edward, is the president of our 50-person business, and my brother, Eric, is the chief marketing officer. Despite not going to college, Dad trained at one of the best trade schools available. I, on the other hand, earned degrees in industrial engineering and accounting and serve as CFO and COO. Eric and I were complete opposites physically. At 6'3" and 50 pounds heavier than me, he was a typical jock, loud, brash, and often a bully. In high school, he was a star running back, and a small college scholarship helped him through school, while I worked part-time and took out loans. Eric only graduated because professors passed him to keep him eligible for football. His physical education degree didn't serve him well, so he started at Tyndall as a junior mechanic. Precision work wasn't his strength, but his name and football fame helped him connect with customers. Although he couldn't speak in detail about our work, he was excellent at keeping clients satisfied. He played a valuable role, even if he didn't have the technical knowledge. Like many family-run businesses, we had our disagreements. One example was Eric's request for a commission on new sales, despite already having a good salary. I used that moment to push for full control over the income from patents I had developed. Dad caved to Eric's request quickly, but I had to fight hard to get the earnings from my patents. My wife, Carol, and I met during a 5K charity run for a local library. I first noticed her because of her impressive figure, particularly her toned physique. We hadn't even spoken yet, but I was already intrigued. I kept pace with her for most of the race, sneaking glances at her as I followed. When another runner dropped his water bottle, Carol stumbled and I helped steady her. She thanked me, introduced herself, and we started running together. That was the beginning of our relationship. Carol was an English teacher with a degree in secondary education. A year after we met, we were married in her hometown church. After 2 wonderful years of marriage, we decided to start a family. However, despite our best efforts, Carol couldn't get pregnant. We tried everything: diet changes, different positions, and tracking her ovulation. We didn't want to get fertility tests yet, so we just kept trying. Eventually, we stopped stressing about it and returned to just enjoying each other. A couple of months later, Carol missed her period. She didn't want to tell me at first, but when it happened again, we both knew something was different. I was overjoyed because family meant everything to me. The Tyndall family had been a part of the community for over a century, and we took great pride in our legacy. Carol's pregnancy wasn't easy. She was bedridden for the last 2 months under doctor's orders, and the delivery was complicated. We almost lost both her and our son, Sam. His size caused complications, and he had to be delivered via C-section. During the surgery, the doctor warned us against trying for another child, as it could be life-threatening for both Carol and any future babies. So we decided to undergo surgery to ensure it wouldn't happen again. Sam, our miracle boy, was full of energy. He loved playing rough with me, much to Carol's dismay. We spent countless hours playing sports, but his grades were just above average. Not exceptional, but not bad either. Sam was everything we'd hoped for, and more. Things began to unravel after Sam's 15th birthday. I chalked it up to the usual teenage rebellion. He started pulling away. We used to spend hours chatting and tossing a ball, but now he was too absorbed in his phone or Game Boy to talk. When I pushed him for a conversation, he'd get grumpy and disrespectful. It seemed like he thought my job as an accountant wasn't manly enough, which might have been influenced by the fact that he had outgrown me physically and was becoming more muscular. Meanwhile, Carol continued to excel in her career. Her dedication and intellect had earned her the position of principal at McKinley School, an institution for students who struggled academically and socially. But the stress of managing disruptive kids started to affect our home life. She'd snap at me over little things, making sharp comments about tasks I'd done, or hadn't done, according to her standards. Still, these tensions didn't seem to affect our intimacy. In bed, she was always loving, and our intimacy life was fulfilling. Then, one evening, everything changed. I overheard Eric telling Sam that he, not me, was Sam's father and that he'd been sleeping with Carol for over 17 years. I couldn't believe it. It sounded outrageous, but what did I truly know for sure? The resemblance between Eric, Edward, and Sam was striking. Same build, same features. And I felt a gnawing suspicion in my gut. That night, I watched Carol closely. Nothing seemed off. Dinner was normal, and when Sam left for the movies with his friends, Carol and I started cleaning up. She asked me to load the dishwasher while she went to the bathroom. When she returned, the only thing she was wearing was a lace apron. She acted casual, telling me to hurry up, that she had plans for me later. We laughed and flirted while finishing the chores, and then headed to bed, where I was treated to some of the best closeness we'd had in a while. She was as responsive as ever, and I could tell she was genuinely enjoying herself. There was no sign of her faking anything. Afterward, we cuddled and reaffirmed our love for each other. The next morning, we drove to my parents' house to celebrate my father, Edward's 70th birthday. Carol didn't like riding in my Volvo, so we took her Lexus instead. When we arrived, my mom, Sally, greeted us first by hugging Carol, then Sam, and lastly me. The same order followed with my dad. I was curious to see the interaction between Carol and Eric. Eric greeted Sam warmly, then reached out to hug Carol. His hug was full of enthusiasm, but Carol's response was cold. She barely reacted, and I could swear I saw a look of annoyance on her face. This wasn't how someone who'd been involved with another person for 17 years would act. When it was my turn, Eric gave me a chest bump, his 46-inch chest thudding against my 36-inch frame in a display of dominance. I began to sense something wasn't right, so I decided to dig a little deeper, not so much as an investigator, but more like the bumbling fool trying to stumble upon a secret. During a lull in conversation, I casually asked Eric, "Hey, I need to meet with our CPA Thursday afternoon. You going to be around to cover for me?" I knew Eric didn't understand anything about accounting, so he wouldn't be able to help anyone who called in my absence. "No, I'll be out," he replied. "Big project coming up." I turned to Carol, who blew a bubble in her iced tea, her usual sign that I was getting close to something. I pressed on. "Is it the kind of project that'll get you all sweaty and tired?" Eric brushed it off. "Nah, I've worked with this person a lot and always come out on top." The look Carol shot him was scorching, and the tension in the room was palpable. It was as if everyone at the table knew exactly what was going on. No one made a sound, not even the clink of a fork or the rattle of ice in a glass. The silence felt heavier than midnight in a graveyard. I realized then that everyone was aware of the affair. They thought I didn't know, and I played the fool, soaking in the truth beneath the awkwardness. Finally, Dad broke the silence. "All right, let's figure out who's doing what." Dad started by saying, "I'm glad you boys could make it for my birthday. This 160-acre tract was bought by my grandfather when it was far from town. He'd be proud it's still in the family, and our business is doing well under your leadership, Eric and Joe. I've decided to retire as president of Tyndall, and Eric will take over. There'll also be a change in salary structure. Joe's salary will always be 75% of Eric's. I want Joe to stay and be rewarded for his work. With Joe's income from patents, both of you will have similar earnings." Carol gave my arm a reassuring squeeze and smiled at me. I couldn't help but ask, "So I'll be answering to Eric? The same Eric who can't tell a CNC machine from a popcorn maker? This is a disaster waiting to happen." Eric shot back, "Look, little brother, I've always been the one to take charge while you've been stuck counting beans. It takes an alpha male to lead, not a weakling like you. Get over it, Joe. Once again, I win and you lose." "Enough," Dad interjected. "Eric, you're not the boss man. I'm still the chairman and own all the stock. You'll run the business under my guidance. This company's been in the family for over a century, and I won't let it fall apart now. We're Tyndalls, and our legacy is in our hands." He pointed to pictures of past Tyndall men on the wall. Curious, I asked, "Dad, which one is Grandpa?" "Grandpa's on the left, then my father, and I'm at the far end. I thought you'd know that." I hesitated, then asked, "I'm just confirming something. Looking at those pictures, I don't look like any Tyndall. Not the same build, hair color, or facial features. Eric and Sam do, but I don't get it. Mom and Dad both froze. Mom's shoulders slumped and Dad's face turned red. Silence filled the room as everyone exchanged tense glances. I knew the best way to get the truth was to throw something shocking out there and let them squirm. Dad sighed heavily. Joe, it's time you knew the family secret. Your mother and I were planning to marry when she got drunk at her bachelorette party and got pregnant. She thought I was the father, but she had no way of knowing. We married before she knew she was pregnant, and I thought I was the dad. You were a weak and sickly baby, and we thought it was because of your mother's complications. We almost lost you to the mumps. We didn't figure out you weren't my biological son until you were about 10. Your mother had hidden the fact that she'd slept with someone else before we married. When DNA testing became available, we tested, and it turned out you weren't mine. Eric was. This was not the revelation I had expected. I'd been fishing for answers about Sam's real father, and instead I was hit with this. Now I had even more questions, but I didn't know how to process it all. Mom spoke softly. Joe, none of this changes how much we love you. We raised you as our son, and we still do. I was grateful for her words, but they didn't answer the questions I had about Sam. Okay, Dad, I get why I don't look like a Tyndall. But why doesn't Sam have my body type instead of looking like you and Eric? Dad took a deep breath and continued. Joe, you and Carol tried so hard to have a baby, but it became too stressful. Carol thought she was failing you and came to your mother for advice. We realized that you were likely sterile from the mumps, so, for the sake of your marriage and the Tyndall legacy, we decided Eric would impregnate Carol. She was reluctant at first, but eventually saw the benefits. You wanted a family, and Eric and Carol gave you what you couldn't. We hoped this wouldn't come to light, but with DNA tests and genetic differences, it was bound to eventually. My mind was reeling. I felt like a tornado of emotions was tearing through me, but I couldn't find the words to express it. Mom and Carol surrounded me, hugging me tenderly, both with tears in their eyes, feeling my pain. Mom whispered, My son, I'm so proud of you. Carol murmured, My husband, I love you so much. Dad spoke carefully. We hoped you wouldn't be hurt by this, but we wanted you to know how much we all love you. I stared at Dad, my mind racing. So, Edward, is it okay if I call you Edward now that I know you're not my father? Why would you think I wouldn't mind being humiliated by my own family? Sam suddenly chimed in. Now you know how I feel. I've had to live with people thinking you're my father instead of a real man like Eric. Geez. Everyone's gaze turned to Sam, his arrogance making the tension even thicker. Carol slapped Sam across the face, her voice rising. Joe's been the best father to you. He gave everything for you, always. I've seen 1,000 kids with worse dads, but none better than him. You should count yourself lucky he raised you. I sarcastically muttered, Oh, nice of you to finally share your concern for my feelings. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Instead of lying all these years, you could have told me right away. I bet you had a good laugh behind my back while I boasted about having such a great son. Instead, I was clueless Joe, right? The room went quiet again, the tension hanging thick in the air. Dad spoke up. We couldn't tell you, Joe. It would have been too painful, and we hoped it would stay hidden. Plus, we needed you at the company. You're the brains behind everything. We'd be lost without you. And truth be told, we couldn't afford anyone else as good as you. A headhunter told us your job was worth more than double what we've been paying you. I could barely process it. So, you encouraged my brother to have a baby with my wife instead of me? You kept me working for less than I deserved just so your profits and dividends stayed high. You made me think I'd be running things one day, but apparently, blood matters more than talent. I couldn't take it anymore. I can't believe what I'm hearing. Next thing you'll tell me is that my wife is still sleeping with that bastard brother of mine. The room held its breath. Would she admit it? Or would she keep up the lies? After a long silence, Carol finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, Joe. I never wanted to hurt you. You have to understand how stressed I've been at work. I don't love him. I hate him for what he is. But I needed him to cope with everything. I'm so sorry. She crumpled to the floor, her shoulders shaking. My instinct told me to go to her, but my mind screamed, Stop! She did this to herself, and now she had to face the consequences. Dad, looking defeated, added, I'm sorry, son. But Son, you're a damn hypocrite. Calling me son after everything you've done to destroy my life. You barely showed me any affection growing up, always favoring Eric. Then you encouraged my wife to betray me. pushing his child on me as mine, all while laughing at how clueless I was about the utter disrespect you had for me. I couldn't hold back anymore. I'm done with this mess. You acted like you were doing this for me, but you were screwing me over for your own selfish reasons. None of it was for my good. It's all been heartbreaking. I felt like an orphan, abandoned, with no one to turn to. A heartfelt, screw you, to every single one of you. My voice was shaking with anger as I turned to leave, but just as I reached the door, a heavy hand grabbed my arm. Look, Joe, I'm sorry. Since this means so much to you, I'll stop sleeping with your wife. I've been with her for so long, she's all stretched out now, and I'd prefer something tighter. So, I'm giving her back to you. The sheer nerve of that guy, handing my wife back to me like some used object. I was about to leave when Eric grabbed me and spun me around. The motion caught me off guard, but it worked out. I threw a punch, aiming for his nose, but instead of hitting his face, I landed a solid blow to his throat. His eyes bulged, and he stopped mocking me, choking out only guttural sounds. He collapsed, clutching his neck, unable to see, let alone speak. This was my chance. I stepped back and kicked him in the groin as hard as I could. The scream that followed was pure agony. Carol and Sam rushed to his side, but they couldn't have been more different in their reactions. Sam was trying to comfort Eric, while Carol was kicking him, screaming, "You deserve this and worse." I walked away from the chaos, climbed into Carol's car, and deliberately backed it into Eric's Corvette. As I sped off, I clipped Edward's new truck. My emotions were a mess, and I barely managed to keep the car on the road. After a while, I found an old, abandoned gas station and stopped. I cried until I thought I might drown in my own tears. Then the rage took over. I pounded the dashboard, my frustration boiling over. Eventually, exhaustion hit. Weak and numb, I heard my phone buzzing with messages from Carol. I sighed. What was I supposed to do now? Nothing could undo what had happened. 3 days ago, I was on top of the world, and now everything had fallen apart. I wasn't just betrayed. I was a fool, a bastard. My mother wasn't even married to my biological father. It was a complete mess. But somehow, I still had options. Option 1, stay with the job and take the pay raise, but report to Eric or Edward. I'd see them every day, reliving the pain. No thanks. Option 2, slip away quietly. Let the Tyndalls go on without me. But they hadn't cared before. Why would they care now? So that wasn't for me either. Option 3, get even. Play the game with the family of snakes, but on my terms. Make them regret every lie, every betrayal. Yeah, that was the one. I gathered my stuff, my computer, paperwork, a few clothes, loaded up the Volvo. Bullet, Sam's dog, wouldn't stop bothering me. He always hated me, and now he was making a scene while I packed. He even left me a parting gift, a massive dump by the house. Laughing, I scooped it up and took it into the bedroom. I placed it right on our old wedding quilt, the one my mother and grandmother made. The quilt was a patchwork of memories. Wedding rings, clothes we wore as kids, and our names stitched in. It was the perfect spot for a steaming pile of dog crap, topped off with my wedding ring. Carol would get the message. I then destroyed the framed photos of Carol and Eric's son, hammering a nail through the stack, sending glass flying. It was all a final act of defiance. With that, I was done. Nothing kept me tied to this place anymore. I loaded my Volvo and drove across town to an extended stay hotel. After unloading, I dropped the car at the airport parking and rented another one. My plan was simple: disappear and make sure the snakes never found me. I arrived at my new base of operations, an anonymous rental car, and from there, an Uber took me to pick up Sam's car and stash it in a storage unit. Once I'm settled, I'll sell it. It's in my name anyway, since Sam couldn't get insured after his endless speeding tickets. Dinner was a solo affair. Pizza and beer delivered to my room. I didn't want to be seen, not while I had some work to do. First, I moved my personal funds, ensuring I alone controlled them. Closed joint credit cards and left Carol the equivalent of her last 2 paychecks in the account. The rest, including the entire college fund I'd been saving for Sam, was gone. He'll need to ask his real father for that now. It took me a while to fall asleep. I kept thinking about the good times with my family, but reality set in. The people I loved didn't care about me, so why should I care about them? That mental reset shifted me from clueless Joe to fearsome Joe. Tomorrow, fearsome Joe would hit Tyndall Manufacturing. Since it was Sunday, no one would be there. Perfect for what I had in mind. It actually made me sleep easier. The next morning, I parked the rental car a little way from Tyndall Manufacturing's entrance. I could have parked closer, but that would have raised suspicion. Inside, I disabled the security alarm, then rearmed it and headed straight for my office. As CFO, I had access to everything. Tyndall had multiple accounts, so I transferred all the funds into the main one, reserving enough for 2 payrolls. I maxed out the business line of credit and moved that too. The money went straight to the company's international account in the Caymans, perfectly legal. This account had been set up years ago as a clearinghouse for our European transactions. Next, I had some fun. I changed the login credentials for every account, making it nearly impossible for anyone to access them. They wouldn't even know where to begin since the banks never sent paper statements. I updated the mailing address to a random location in Montana, then sent out closure notices for utilities: electricity, gas, water, phone, and internet. The Tyndalls had always kept paper records, but 5 years ago I switched everything to the cloud. The only physical files left were vehicle titles and warranties, which I controlled. I changed all the passwords and logins, even for the CNC machines. Eric's office was next. I rifled through his computer and found some interesting files. Videos of him sleeping with employees, local wives, and, of course, Carol. I copied them onto a thumb drive and left the computer untouched. This would be for later. My final stop was the utility room, a concrete-walled, locked fortress where the electricity for the entire plant came in. Only the electrician and I had access, and I was about to shut everything down. The power company would take a while to respond, but by the time they did, I'd have locked everything down. I replaced all the locks and tossed the keys into a bucket of cleaner fluid, erasing any trace of ownership. Walking out of the building was bittersweet. This was where I grew up, where I envisioned my future. I had planned on becoming president, with Sam eventually taking over. But now, that dream was shattered, just like so many others. Over the years at Tyndall, I'd attended conventions and meetings while Eric took his buddies out drinking and to dance clubs. Now, I was eyeing this new world as a potential job market. I didn't bother reading the dozens of messages from my family. They were the same. We love you, we're sorry, and please talk to us. We did this for you, not to hurt you. My mother even begged me to forgive her for getting pregnant with me and staying married to Edward. Then the number 17 hit me like a brick. Because Carol had been sleeping with him for 17 years. My mother was just a one-night mistake. Tuesday morning, I called my attorney, Bob Carson, to discuss my options. He had a 3 p.m. slot available, so I went back to my apartment, grabbed the documents he might need, and got ready for the meeting. My initial plan was to file for divorce on the grounds of adultery, but I knew that would require moving Carol to another state, a move I doubted she'd agree to. I told Bob about the affair and made it clear that I wasn't paying child support. I was fine with a 50-50 split, but I wanted to keep everything I had, which wasn't much. I didn't own any stock in Tyndall MFG, only a salary and some patent income. Tyndall had been shortchanging me with a subpar salary that I once thought would lead to a bigger role, maybe even stock ownership. Carol's income as a school principal was similar to mine, so Bob thought the divorce would go smoothly, unless she fought it. We decided to move quickly, filing as soon as possible, ideally at her school. After years of humiliation, it was time for her to feel some shame. During the meeting, I also informed Bob about the changes I'd made to Tyndall's finances. As CFO, I had the authority to move money between accounts, but I hadn't stolen any. I simply made it harder for them to access. Bob wasn't thrilled about my actions. "Joe, if this results in any financial loss to Tyndall, they could sue you," he warned. "And what will they get? I don't have anything worth suing for. Besides, I'd love for them to take me to court. They wouldn't want the public to know why I did it." I wasn't worried. Tyndall's dirty laundry was better kept hidden. Bob then informed me of his $3,000 retainer fee. Within a week, I had 3 meetings with manufacturers who were interested in both my expertise and access to my patents. I didn't need to stay in town anymore. I had friends who would help, but I wasn't about to burden them. My only way out of this mess was to rise above it and start over, at 43 years old. Then, a week later, Bob called. He'd just left the county attorney's office, where Edward had been screaming about embezzlement, wire fraud, and grand theft. Bob calmly explained that all the funds were still in Tyndall's active accounts, and nothing had been withdrawn. Edward would just need to arrange for a new signer on the account, which would require a painful trip to the Caymans, something he hated more than anything. A month later, Carol was served with divorce papers. Bob called to ask if I had returned her calls. I laughed at the thought. Of course, I hadn't responded to any of her messages. Calls, texts, emails, nothing. There were 2 main issues blocking the divorce. Carol was fighting me over taking Sam's college fund and car. Even Bob thought that would be hard to get past a judge. My response? Fine. I'd give them half of the college fund. But if that wasn't enough, I'd file a fraud claim, since I'd been led to believe I was Sam's father for the past 16 years and paid for all his expenses. I'd sue Carol, Eric, Sally, and Edward. I might not win, but it would be a media circus, and I'd make sure their dirty laundry aired for the world to see. A week later, Bob called again. Carol was willing to sign the papers if I agreed to spend 1 hour with her. She wanted to explain or justify her actions. I didn't care. I had no desire to see her, but I knew I had to close this chapter for good. I agreed, under the condition that it would just be the two of us, and I insisted on recording the meeting to protect myself. After what I'd been through over the past 17 years, I wasn't taking any chances. At 3 p.m. the following week, I parked my rental car in front of my old house. I didn't see any cars that made me nervous, so I walked to the front door. It opened almost immediately. Carol had clearly been waiting. I couldn't help but notice the absence of the usual attempts to seduce me. No fancy dress, no favorite meal in the oven, no special drink waiting for me. She'd made it clear this wasn't going to be a reunion. The divorce papers sat between us, a stark symbol of the end. While the paperwork was just a formality, the marriage had already been shattered long ago. She offered me a drink, but I declined. There was no need for pleasantries or small talk anymore. I didn't care how she was, so I didn't ask. Instead, I simply told her it was her turn to speak. For the next 15 minutes, she recited the same tired script I'd heard countless times. Apologies, excuses, and pleas to work things out. Nothing new, nothing sincere. She even tried to justify her actions by mentioning how Edward had forgiven my mother. I couldn't resist, and in sharp, frustrated letters on the envelope, I wrote the numbers. 408 freaking. She didn't argue. I barely reacted. Her words had lost their power over me. She tried again, asking if I had questions. I gave her a blank stare and asked, "Why?" With a sigh, she began her explanation. She spoke of being coerced into using Eric's seed to have a child, of family pressure, and Edward's obsession with the Tyndall bloodline. She claimed she had hoped I would be the one to father her child, but things had spiraled out of control. She said she had wanted us to be a family, but she admitted to screwing it up. Her reasoning didn't sit right with me. I told her I couldn't accept her twisted logic. To think that the idea of Eric's child would somehow bond our family was absurd, but she kept trying to defend her actions. She said that continuing to be with Eric after Sam's conception was about her, not me. It was her way of coping with her need for humiliation, her craving for something rough. She claimed she went back to Eric because his love was different. Rough, intense, everything she couldn't find with me. She said it wasn't about me being a bad lover. It was about something she couldn't explain. I was tender and loving, but she felt she needed to be taken down a peg to experience the brutality that Eric gave her. In her mind, it wasn't a reflection of me. It was a flaw in her. I let her talk, but the more she spoke, the more disgusted I became. She tried to frame everything as a deep personal flaw, something she needed to do to feel humbled. She admitted to using Eric for rough sex, as a way to break down her own arrogance, to humble herself. But I wasn't buying it. She had hurt me, betrayed me, and now she was trying to rewrite the story as if it was all some therapy session gone wrong. When she mentioned how she had always kept her affairs with Eric separate from me, I pressed further, asking details I didn't want to know. Had she ever had intimacy with him on the same day as with me? She hesitated, then admitted there had been times. She tried to justify it, claiming she would douche afterward, but the damage was done. The more she spoke, the more it became clear that she was trying to shield herself, to somehow paint her actions as less hurtful than they were. But no matter what she said, it was clear that her betrayal was not just physical. It was emotional, mental, and deeply personal. It was a lie wrapped in 1,000 excuses, and I wasn't interested in hearing anymore. I'd heard enough. After lunch at Mama Anna's, the lasagna in my stomach churned violently, boiling like molten lava. The thought that I had unknowingly eaten Eric's seed coming from my wife pushed me past the breaking point. I couldn't control it. Vomit exploded from my mouth, hitting the table and splattering Carol with my half-digested meal. Stumbling out the door, I left a trail of food behind, the sound of Carol's sobs echoing in my ears. Honestly, I didn't care how much she hated the mess. It was nothing compared to what she'd done to me. 2 weeks later, my attorney had to reprint the divorce papers because no one at the courthouse wanted to touch the original ones. When it was finally signed, I got half of the college fund and car proceeds, while she kept the house until Sam finished high school. I figured he probably hated me, but since he had chosen to cut me out of his life, I had no reason to stick around or pay child support. If the court tried to force me, I'd switch the grounds to adultery and sue the whole damn Tyndall family for fraud. No one wanted that kind of scandal. During my retreat from the world, I found myself hesitating to watch the videos I had downloaded from Eric's office. I wasn't ready to see two people I despised in the most intimate way possible. But one file caught my eye. A small one labeled Sindra. That name stopped me cold. Sindra was married to one of my closest friends, John Brown. John and I had never been particularly close in high school. He was a jock, and I was the nerd. But I'd helped him with English when he was struggling, and over time, we became friends. After he graduated, we lost touch, but later he returned to our town, looking for work. I recommended him for a job, and we picked up our friendship from where we'd left off. A couple of years ago, things between John and Sindra had gone south. She'd gotten drunk or maybe sedated at a girls' night out and slept with another man. She confessed to John right away, but the damage was done. They had 2 young kids, and divorce was a terrible option. I clicked on the file. The video started with Sindra stumbling into a hotel room looking dazed. It was clear from her movements she was out of it, probably still drunk or sedated. Eric appeared, undressing her without a word, and I felt sick to my stomach. The scene played out like a cold, detached act, not one of love, but of pure physicality. Eric didn't care. He had his fun, grabbed a drink afterward, and then, without speaking, Sindra shuffled off to the bathroom, dressed, and left. The whole thing felt like a nightmare. John had always wanted answers, and now I had them. I decided to show him the video in case he ever needed proof. I invited him over one evening to talk, offering him a couple of beers to steady his nerves. After a while, he asked what this private discussion was about. "John, I found a video of your wife with another man. I can either tell you who it is, show you the video, or both. Which one hurts the least?" I kept my voice steady, but inside I was boiling with anger and disgust. It took him a moment to process. His eyes welled up and he breathed deeply. I didn't say anything but placed a hand on his shoulder for support. "Who?" he finally asked. "Eric," I said, watching his face change. "It looks like she was sedated or drunk. It wasn't her choice." John was stunned. "But she hates him." "Why would she sleep with Eric?" I nodded. "She was out of it. I'll show you the video, and you'll see she wasn't in control." He watched in silence, his face growing pale as the video played. Afterward, he just stared at me, trying to absorb the reality of what had happened. "Why?" he asked quietly, barely able to keep it together. "Why would he do that to her?" "John, my guess is that he didn't even know her last name. He saw a drunk woman and took what he wanted. He probably didn't care who she was. She was just a target." John was silent, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the humiliation. He had to live with this knowledge now, just like I had to live with knowing what Carol had done to me. John stood up, his eyes heavy with emotion. "Thanks, Joe. This is helping more than I thought. I'm glad I forgave her back then. I knew she was sorry, but now I know the truth. I'm not sure if I'll ever tell Sindra, but I'll figure it out. Can I keep the video?" "Of course," I replied. "It's probably the only copy." John paused, looking at me with a half smile. "Would you be mad if Eric had a few accidents over the next few months?" I shrugged. "It would work in my favor. I've already kicked him in the nuts once, so I'll be a suspect anyway. Just let me know when so I can cover my tracks." "Thanks, Joe. You're a better brother than I ever had." We shared a brief hug before he left, calling over his shoulder, "Keep in touch." I spent little time watching the videos of Carol and Eric. It was too much to handle, and I had no interest in reliving the mess they'd made of my life. Eventually, I deleted the files with Carol's name on them, until fate took a cruel turn. I accidentally hit play instead of delete. What I saw was more revolting than I could have imagined. Carol, on her knees, had a look of pure ecstasy on her face as Eric pounded into her. It wasn't love. It was pure animalistic sex. He held a leash attached to her neck with one hand, the other pulling her hair to make her look at the camera. Between breaths, he shouted, "Bark like a dog, witch!" And she did. It felt like my heart had been ripped out. The woman I loved, the one I'd built my life around, was reduced to this, degrading herself in ways I never thought possible. That moment destroyed everything I once thought I knew about her. 2 weeks later, John came by for a beer, still processing everything. He thanked me again for showing him the truth about Sindra, how it wasn't an affair, but maltreatment. He had plans to use the remaining videos to expose Eric's crimes, helping other men who had been victimized by him. I handed over the rest of the files without hesitation. Meanwhile, I was moving on. I'd started looking for new job opportunities, and it paid off when Donen Corporation reached out to me. They offered me an interview 100 miles away. It was the first thing that had brought me some relief in months. I made myself available whenever they wanted to meet. The interview with Tim Donen, the CEO, went smoothly. He made it clear he didn't like being called Mr. Donen, just Tim. The job offer came with a solid package. But there was one condition. I had to meet with the head of Reynolds Resources for a personality evaluation. Given everything I'd been through, I had my doubts about how they'd assess me. The next morning, I showed up at Reynolds Resources for my evaluation. It was a sharp contrast to Donen's basic office, modern and sleek. After a brief wait, I was greeted by Mickey D. Reynolds, the owner. She was an attractive woman in her early 30s, with a firm handshake and a friendly smile. Our conversation was easy, focused on my background and my philosophy of engineering. Mickey was professional, but she let me share what I felt comfortable with. When she asked why I left Tyndall, I simply said I'd been passed over for a promotion and felt underpaid for my work. At 11:45, she glanced at the clock. "I'll send my report to Tim and he'll follow up with you," she said. "I bet you're hungry. Want to grab lunch?" I smiled. "Would it be against company rules for me to offer? Maybe a Chamber of Commerce tour?" She smiled back. "I'd love that." That lunch turned into a series of meals over the next few months. Lunches that stretched into dinners and late-night talks. I took things slow, not rushing into anything, but enjoying every moment with her. It was clear she was also happy with the pace. We were building something real, something I hadn't expected to find. Meanwhile, back at Tyndall Manufacturing, things weren't going well financially. While they had the cash to cover bills, money was tight. Edward was forced to tap into emergency assets to keep the company afloat, trying to prevent vendors from pulling their contracts. It seemed like Tyndall was on the edge of a cliff, and it wouldn't take much to send them over. The 160 acres of prime land near town, worth millions, had been in the Tyndall family for over a century. The idea of mortgaging it to keep the business afloat was unthinkable. But the funds from the mortgage kept the company running until Edward traveled to the Caymans to secure control over the money. However, the damage to the company's reputation was severe. Suppliers, once willing to extend credit, now demanded cash up front, further straining their capital, and the mortgage went unpaid, as the Cayman funds slowly made their way back to the U.S. As things unraveled, Mickey D. learned the details of my personal and business struggles. She sympathized, having lost her husband in a tragic accident when a UPS truck ran him over 2 years earlier. She had held Reynolds Resources together in his absence. Meanwhile, John informed me that Eric had been attacked in a bar parking lot. Beaten with a steel pipe, Eric begged for mercy, before his attacker broke his finger, saying, "That's for sticking your finger in my wife." I found a sense of peace in my new job at Donen Corporation. I settled in quickly, and without a non-compete clause from Tyndall, I began luring their top customers. Unlike Eric, I didn't rely on flashy sales tactics. I simply knew how to deliver better products, faster and cheaper. Eric, meanwhile, seemed to be a target, injured frequently after nights out at bars. 6 months after my divorce, my relationship with Mickey D. was growing stronger. She was beautiful, smart, and a joy to be around. We started spending more time together, and our closeness became physical. One night, it became clear she was interested in taking things further. After a particularly intimate moment, she asked, "Shall we leave now?" "Absolutely," I replied, kissing her passionately. We couldn't keep our hands off each other on the way back to her place. Once there, the tension between us was palpable. Slowly, we undressed each other. "Did you bring protection?" she whispered. "I'm sterile," I admitted. "That's why Carol had Eric's baby." Mickey was taken aback. "No doctor? The same mother who lied to you about who fathered you? I'd get a second opinion." She didn't want to risk pregnancy, so she gave me 3 choices: my mouth, my hands, or my feet. "Feet?" I asked, confused. "Yeah, your feet leaving my apartment," she teased. 5 seconds to decide. With my mind clouded by desire, I quickly answered, "Mouth." "Good choice," she smiled. In a flash, she positioned herself over me, and I barely had time to respond before she was guiding me with her hands. We both reached our limits before morning, after a marathon of pleasure. Afterward, we discussed my fertility. I agreed to see a specialist for a seed test. The results were revealing. I had about 25 million seed, far below the average range of 50 to 100 million. My seed mobility was average, but the doctor said there was no immediate concern. Some lifestyle adjustments, like vitamins and cutting back on drinking, might improve things, but I wasn't infertile. Mickey was satisfied with the results, and we moved forward, knowing our relationship had deepened in ways I never expected. The best way to get pregnant, according to the doctor, was not to obsess over it. He likened it to roulette, a game of chance where my limited swimmers simply hadn't hit the target. Slim odds, but not impossible. Mickey decided to go back on birth control, and I used protections for a couple of months as we figured out our next steps. Around Christmas, we started talking about moving in together, planning to make it official after the new year. But first, Mickey wanted me to meet her parents. She told them she was dating someone special, and they wanted me to visit. It felt like the first step toward having a real family again. I was nervous as we pulled up to their large but unpretentious house. The door opened, and Mickey stepped forward to hug a man in a red Christmas sweater. Turning to me, she said, "Daddy, I'd like you to meet Joe Tyndall." Before she could finish, I interrupted. "Tim? As in Tim Donan? Wow, I didn't know you were her father." Tim smiled warmly. "Well, now you do. Come on in, Joe." I turned to Mickey, astonished. "Why didn't you tell me?" She shrugged with a sly smile. "I wanted you to like me for me, not because of my last name. Plus, I didn't want people at work gossiping about you dating the boss's daughter." Her honesty was refreshing, and it helped set the tone for a warm evening with her parents. Over dinner, the conversation flowed effortlessly, and I realized just how much I liked them. By the end of the night, it felt like they would welcome me into their family without hesitation. A few weeks later, I proposed. Mickey jumped off the couch and into my arms, shouting, "Yes, yes, yes!" Her enthusiasm left me breathless, but I didn't mind. 3 months later, we had a small wedding. On my side were only John, Sindra, and a few new friends I'd made. After a honeymoon in the Caribbean, we returned home ready to start our life together. One of our first steps was changing our names. Mickey reverted to her maiden name, Donan, and I took the same last name, officially becoming Joseph Timothy Donan. When we asked for Tim's blessing, his reaction was priceless. With tears in his eyes, he whispered, "Thank you, son." Meanwhile, John uncovered a video of Carol and Eric and decided to settle some scores. Through his son Tyler, who attended the same school as Carol's students, John obtained a list of text numbers for senior boys. Using a new account, he sent the video to several of them under the title Principal Freaking Class 101. A week later, Carol experienced the fallout. As she walked through the halls between classes, she heard barking. At first, she thought it was just a coincidence, but as the barking followed her from one group of smirking boys to another, she grew uneasy. She checked her clothes, worried something was out of place, but saw nothing amiss. When she entered her office, the barking stopped, but it resumed the moment she stepped out again. By the end of the day, it sounded like an entire kennel had been unleashed in the school. The next morning was even worse. The moment she stepped into the parking lot, it was as if the entire student body had turned into dogs, barking and howling in unison. The noise followed her everywhere, echoing through the halls like a taunt she couldn't escape. Carol rushed into the building, focusing only on the concrete ahead of her, avoiding the mocking voices behind her. The door shut with a sigh of relief. But as she walked to her office, a voice cut through the tension. "Bark like a dog, witch! Bark like a dog!" It sounded like Eric's. What was he doing here? Suddenly it hit her like a ton of bricks. The boys must have gotten hold of one of the videos from Eric. She didn't need to dwell on how it got out. All she could think about was the fallout. Her career, dignity, and job were on the line. Panicked, she rushed into her office, slamming the door behind her. Did the staff know? Had anyone seen the video? What was she supposed to do now? By the time the first class hour was halfway over and the halls were quiet, Carol bolted from her office, shouting she was sick and needed to go home. But she didn't go home. She sped straight to Tyndall Manufacturing. Bursting into Eric's office, she seethed. "Did you leak the videos? If you did, I swear I'll liquidate you." Eric, feeling the heat of her anger, quickly stammered, "No, I've still got all the videos. I'm the only one who has them." He patted his computer and pulled up the file to prove it. "Stupid idiot," Carol hissed. "You've been hacked. The videos are everywhere and I'm ruined." Crumpling to the floor, she sobbed, overwhelmed. Eric, unsure of what to do, ran to his father's office. The two of them rushed back to Carol, who was still crying uncontrollably. Their solution? Take her home, shut the door, and return to work as though nothing had happened. 5 years later, Carol lost her position as principal. Her reputation had been shattered, and the staff, students, and board no longer respected her. A new role was created for her, one where she worked in a basement office, reviewing state and national education guidelines. There was little interaction with colleagues or students. She started each day at 6 a.m., wearing flannel pajamas and slippers, leaving before school let out. Her new life was a social prison. She was forced to shop out of town to avoid ridicule, while her son Sam often got sent home for fighting. It was hard for him to ignore the taunts from classmates, who called his mother Lassie the Wonder Dog. At first, some men sent her dog biscuits with phone numbers attached, hoping for a response. But Carol had long since given up on love. Meanwhile, Tyndall Manufacturing's fortunes plummeted after my departure. Customers flocked to Donen Manufacturing, and Eric's poor leadership, combined with rising operational costs, led to the company's collapse. In order to cover mounting debts, Edward was forced to sell the family's 160-acre farm, which was developed into mid-priced housing. The company was sold, and Edward, now in financial ruin, rented a small apartment with Sally. When they passed, the Tyndall name would be forgotten save for the gravestones. Eric and Sam left town, starting new lives as a used car salesman and a fast food worker. On July 1st, the new owners called for an all-staff meeting to introduce the new president. Edward and Eric were uninvited. The shop foreman, John Brown, addressed the crowd. "Let me introduce you to our new president, Mr. Joe Donen." The staff was relieved the company had been sold to a competitor, not a faceless conglomerate. But the real surprise came when I walked out from the office. The room went silent as people stared, trying to place me. "Hello, everyone. It's good to be back here." "Miss me?" The room erupted into cheers. Apparently, Eric hadn't been the leader everyone had hoped for. After assuring the employees of the positive changes to come, they began chanting my name. "Donen! Donen! Donen!" "Thank you for the warm welcome," I said. "This is going to be a great new chapter for all of us." I smiled and added, "Now, let me introduce you to my family, my wife, Mickey D., and our son, Timothy Joseph Donen." Yes, the DNA test confirmed he was mine. I'd been traveling for work for a while, and while I enjoyed the challenge, I always looked forward to coming home. My wife, Nikki, was constantly on my mind, and as my trips dragged on, I couldn't wait to be with her. We had our little routines, watching a movie or going out to eat, simple things that made life feel normal again. This particular trip had been tough, but I finished early. The project in Dallas went well, and I could surprise Nikki by coming home sooner than expected. The thought of her smile made all the long days worth it. As I headed upstairs with my things, my mind was already on spending the evening with Nikki. Then, I turned around and saw a man at the top of the stairs, holding a tool. Before I could react, I saw a flash and was thrown backward down the stairs. Then, everything went dark. When I woke up, I found myself in an unfamiliar bed. It was dark and I heard someone whispering nearby. I tried to move, but could barely shift my head. As I struggled to focus, I recognized Nikki's voice. She was talking to a man whose back was to me. "What did the doctor say?" he asked. "He said Eric's doing better, but isn't out of danger yet," Nikki replied. I realized they were talking about me. I couldn't figure out what was going on, but Nikki seemed to be pushing him toward the door. "John, you shouldn't be here," she said. "Does he remember anything?" "I don't know," she replied. He was too pilled up to talk to the detective. Nikki urged him to leave, and when I opened my eyes again, she was sitting by the window. The man was gone, and I wasn't sure if I had imagined him. I wanted to ask Nikki where I was and who the man was, but I felt too tired. The next time I woke up, it was morning, and I could see Nikki by the window. She had been crying. I turned my head and saw a man I vaguely remembered, though I didn't know who he was. He was short, with curly brown hair, wearing a worn-out suit. I closed my eyes, pretending to be asleep to avoid his questions. Later, the room was empty, and it was dark outside. I tried to make sense of everything. I knew I was in a hospital, but I didn't know why or for how long. Slowly, my memory returned. I remembered coming home from Dallas, setting down my bags, and heading upstairs. Then I saw a man at the top with a tool. A flash, a bang, and I was falling. After that, I only had fragmented memories. Waking up in the hospital, Nikki crying, and maybe that man asking me questions. But I wasn't sure what was real or what was a dream. The next time I saw Nikki, she looked exhausted, pale, with bloodshot, puffy eyes. She came over, took my hand, and kissed my forehead. "Nikki, are you okay?" "You don't look well," I said, surprised at how weak my voice sounded. Here's a revised version with clearer attribution of dialogue. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted softly. "I was so scared of losing you. But the doctor says you're out of danger now and should make a full recovery." I blinked, trying to gather my thoughts. "How long have I been here?" "Since Friday," she replied. "What's today?" I asked. "Tuesday," she said. I stared at the ceiling. I've lost 3 days, I muttered. She leaned in, her voice filled with concern. How are you feeling now? I'm not sure, I said. My head feels clear, better than before, but I don't feel much otherwise. What happened? You don't remember? She asked, her tone slightly alarmed. Only bits and pieces, I admitted. Before she could say more, a familiar voice interrupted. Why don't I fill him in? Said the man I now recognized as the detective. Curly, still in his worn-out suit, sat down next to Nikki. I'm Detective Tony Trenka. I'm handling your case, he said. You were shot during a burglary when you came home from Dallas on Friday. You were stricken 3 times, in the chest and abdomen, by a man at the top of your stairs. Nikki found you and called emergency. He continued, explaining that I was lucky for 2 reasons. The shooter used a low-caliber tool, and Nikki arrived just in time to save me. I squeezed Nikki's hand, overwhelmed. Do you know who did it? I asked. There have been a string of burglaries in your area, but no one's been shot until now. We're hoping the panic of the shooting left us some clues. Detective Trenka asked me what I remembered, but I could only recall seeing the man at the top of the stairs and his tool before I blacked out. You'll probably remember more later, he reassured me. I'll check in tomorrow. After he left, I turned to Nikki. Thanks for saving my life. She teared up and kissed me. I don't know what I'd do without you, she whispered. Then a terrible thought hit me. Nikki, if I hadn't come home when I did, you might have been the one who walked in on them. Tears filled my eyes as the realization sank in. We held each other, both crying for a while. Eventually, I began to feel some pain, and a nurse came to give me something to help me sleep. When I woke up, Nikki was by the window reading. What did they take? I asked. I don't know yet, she replied. I haven't been back to the house since the shooting. The police are still investigating, and I couldn't bear to see it after what happened. I understand, I said softly. We'll figure it out when they finish. While Nikki was with me, we avoided talking about what happened on Friday. After she left that night, I lay in bed thinking about how close I'd come to losing everything, including her. It could have easily been Nikki who was shot instead of me. I tried to remember more details about the shooting, and something came to mind. I wasn't sure if it was accurate, but I hoped Detective Trenka would visit the next day so I could tell him. A nurse gave me something for pain, and I fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up feeling a little better, but still unable to move much. Nikki came in, kissed me, and said she had to go to work. She stayed until the doctor arrived. How are you feeling? The doctor asked. I'm okay, considering, I replied, asking why I couldn't move my arms or legs. We had to immobilize you after surgery to prevent further injury, he explained. Your injuries were serious, but you're lucky. The bullets missed vital organs. He added that I might be able to go home by Monday, and I wouldn't return to work for at least 3 weeks. After the doctor left, Nikki seemed relieved. She kissed me, promised to return by 4, and left for her meeting. Once alone, I tried to sleep, but couldn't. Later, a nurse came in and removed the restraints, giving me more mobility. I was watching pigeons outside when Detective Trenka appeared. Feeling better? He asked, sitting down. I think so, I replied. I remembered something last night. I think the shooter held the tool in his left hand and was wearing a black ring on his middle finger. Maybe onyx. That's helpful, he said, jotting it down. Knowing he's left-handed and wore an onyx ring is a good lead. We talked for a while, and I noticed he was still wearing the same suit. He explained it was his only one after losing all his clothes in a fire. Before leaving, Detective Trenka told me something chilling. The shooter didn't just think I was dead. He wanted me to die slowly. That's why he shot me in the stomach instead of the head. He promised to find out why. Afterward, he asked me more about my job and co-workers, hinting that someone I knew might be involved. Only after he left did I realize what he might be thinking. Over the next few days, I grew stronger, walking the hospital halls with help. Nikki visited every morning and came back after work for dinner, staying until visiting hours ended. Late at night, when I felt lonely, I'd call her, and we'd talk for over half an hour. As I recovered, I noticed Nikki wasn't doing as well. She looked pale, tired, and had lost weight. I hated knowing how much she had suffered, but I hoped she'd improve once we got home. At night, I thought about how we met in college. We'd first crossed paths at a party, but she didn't make much of an impression at the time. 2 weeks later, we met again, and this time she smiled. After that, we went on our first date, and by the end of the week, we were seeing each other exclusively. Thinking about those memories kept me going through my time in the hospital. Nikki and I had been married for 6 years, and the trip to Dallas had only been our second time apart. The first was when she took a group of students to Germany, and I had to miss it for a work conference. I missed her terribly, but when we reunited, I planned a romantic dinner and we spent a perfect evening together. Nikki even brought me a beautiful beer stein from Germany, a special addition to my collection. Her gift and the memory of that night reminded me how lucky I was to have her in my life. By Monday, I was ready to go home. Nikki had taken the day off and was there early to pick me up. As we drove away, she told me we'd be staying at her parents' house because our home hadn't been cleaned yet. A specialized cleaning crew was coming that day, and I insisted on being there to see what was missing for the insurance claim. On the way home, Nikki stayed quiet, clearly worried about how I'd react to the mess inside. Before we arrived, I told her it would be easier for me to enter through the front door, rather than struggle with the garage stairs. She helped me out of the car, and we slowly walked to the front door. As soon as I stepped inside, a metallic, coppery smell hit me, and I saw my small suitcase and a bag, both soaked in blood, along with a large, dried puddle on the floor. The sight and smell were overwhelming, and when Nikki came in, she ran to the bathroom to vomit. After she finished, I led her to the family room, trying to calm her down as we sat on the couch. Looking around, I noticed some things scattered on the floor and realized the beer stein Nikki had brought me from Germany was missing. Just as I started to think it might have been stolen, Nikki broke my thoughts. Apologizing for not being able to handle the blood, she insisted on making me lunch and getting me to bed, but I told her I wasn't ready for the stairs. I suggested she leave me a sandwich and go back to work so she wouldn't have to be there when the cleaners arrived. Though hesitant, she agreed, made me a sandwich, and left. The cleaners arrived an hour later, and after I let them in, they got to work on the bloodstains. While they worked, I checked the safe in the cabinet above the fireplace. Thankfully, nothing was missing or tampered with, and I felt relieved. I was too tired to clean up the rest of the room, so I rested on the couch. By the time Nikki returned, the house smelled of cinnamon, and the foyer was spotless. Despite the clean house, Nikki looked more stressed than ever. After a large glass of whiskey, she finally relaxed, but started crying, saying she just wanted it all to go away. I tried to comfort her, assuring her the police would catch the burglars, but it didn't seem to help. That night, we slept in the same bed for the first time in 2 weeks, though neither of us slept well. I kept waking up thinking I heard something, and every time Nikki was awake too. By Tuesday, things improved. I felt stronger, managed the stairs on my own, and had breakfast with Nikki before she left for work, while I stayed behind to clean the kitchen. Later that morning, Detective Trenka stopped by to check on me and ask about anything that was stolen. As we chatted, I brewed some coffee. "Did you make a list of what's missing?" he asked. "No, because nothing seems to be missing," I replied. "Really?" Trenka said, surprised. "I've been thinking there must have been at least 2 people involved," I said. Trenka, now asking me to call him Tony, encouraged me to share my theory. I explained how the mess downstairs suggested someone searched the first floor but left in a hurry after the shooting. I found it odd that they didn't take the TV or even try to open the safe. Tony agreed that the shots might have scared them off, but didn't want to rule out other possibilities. He accepted my offer for coffee, and we sat in the family room discussing the burglary. As I looked at the mess, I asked a question that had been bothering me. "Do you think the guy who shot me might come back?" "There's always a chance," Tony admitted, "but it's unlikely. He knows you didn't see his face, and returning would just increase his risk of getting caught." I mentioned Nikki's worry about the burglars returning, and Tony offered to increase patrols in our area. Grateful, I shifted the conversation, asking about his home life. Tony admitted his wife had forgiven him for a mistake, almost involving another woman, but they were doing better now. After Tony left, I spent the rest of the day cleaning up. While there wasn't much to tidy, I was still weak and had to move slowly. The hardest part was picking up the broken glass from the beer stein Nikki had brought me from Germany. It was the only thing that had been shattered, and it felt personal. Upstairs, I found that nothing had been disturbed. Nikki's jewelry was untouched, which led me to believe I must have interrupted the burglars before they could search the second floor. When Nikki came home that evening, the house was spotless. She scolded me for overexerting myself, but I assured her I felt fine. After dinner, she helped me to bed and changed my bandages, relieved that there was no sign of infection. Exhausted, I fell asleep during a gentle massage she gave me. The next morning, Nikki mentioned an open house at school. I encouraged her to go. even though I could see she was still worried about me. Before leaving for work, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "I love you." "I love you too," I replied. After Nikki left, the house felt too quiet. I wanted to do something but couldn't take on any physically demanding tasks after overexerting myself the day before. I promised both Nikki and myself to take it easy. I put on some music, kept the volume low, and started reading a Dean Koontz book I had recently bought. I read through the day, pausing only for lunch until Nikki came home. She was happy I hadn't pushed myself, but lightly scolded me for not taking a nap. After she left for the school open house, I tried watching TV but got bored of reruns. My thoughts drifted back to the burglary and shooting. Something felt off. How could the burglars leave without taking anything? And how did they get in? I decided to check the safe again. Going through its contents, I found something I missed the first time. 2 $300 American Airlines vouchers. The realization hit me hard. Annette. My mind raced, and I started to suspect Nikki had been involved. The thought that she could have been upstairs with the shooter when I was shot filled me with anger, but I knew I needed to stay calm and gather more information. I realized I couldn't confront Nikki yet. Instead, I called my best friend, Jim Culkin, a lawyer, and explained everything. He agreed to come by the next morning. After that, I called Detective Tony Trenka, asking him to come over that night at 9 o'clock because I had important information about the case. By the time Nikki returned at 8:50, I was making notes, planning what to do next. When she asked what I was writing, I told her it wasn't important and mentioned that Jim and Tony were coming over. Nikki looked surprised but curious about Jim. However, her tone shifted to concern when I mentioned Tony. She asked if they had caught the robber, and I told her we'd find out soon enough. Nikki went upstairs to change while I sat there, struggling to control my rising anger. I knew I had to stay calm until I heard what Tony and Jim had to say. Jim arrived right on time at 9 o'clock. As he walked in, he gave me a quick look, likely assessing my condition. Nikki came down and warmly greeted Jim, hugging him and kissing his cheek. Before we could talk much, the doorbell rang again, and Tony arrived. After introductions, Tony seemed curious about Jim's presence. "Jim's here as an observer," I said lightly. Tony didn't question it, and we all moved to the family room. I had coffee ready, and Nikki helped serve it. Once we were seated, I asked Tony about the news he mentioned on the phone. Tony shared that the gang of robbers suspected in my shooting had been arrested that afternoon. However, his hesitation made it clear he had doubts. Sensing this, I pressed him. "Do you think they're the ones who shot me?" Tony paused but admitted, "I'm not sure." Before I could respond, Nikki grabbed my arm. "Do you know who shot you?" she asked, clearly anxious. I shook my head. "No, but I think I can help Tony figure it out." Jim leaned in, listening as I explained my suspicions. I told them about finding the American Airlines vouchers in the safe and how my memories from that day were starting to come together. I explained that when I arrived home at 12:15, the first floor wasn't disturbed yet. The mess was created after I was shot, which suggested the burglars weren't downstairs when I got home. Nikki's face went pale as she listened. "Eric, what are you saying?" I told them that I believed the shooter was already upstairs when I arrived, and the scene downstairs was staged to look like a burglary afterward. I looked directly at Tony and said, "I think Nikki knows who shot me and why." Tony wasn't surprised. "I've been thinking the same thing," he said. "I'll need to take her in for questioning." I asked Tony to let Jim speak with Nikki first, since he was her lawyer. Tony agreed and left, saying that if Nikki didn't voluntarily go to the station, they'd issue a warrant. After Tony left, Jim reminded me that anything Nikki told him would be confidential. I assured him I understood and that I just wanted her to have someone she trusted by her side. Jim then went to talk to Nikki privately while I waited upstairs. 20 minutes later, Jim called me down. He told me Nikki wanted to gather some clothes before leaving. While Jim went to his office, Nikki would pack her things upstairs. I wanted to ask if Nikki had agreed to cooperate with the police, but I knew I couldn't. Jim would tell me what he could, and the rest I would have to wait for. As Nikki packed upstairs, I sat at my desk, trying to process everything. Had I missed signs of trouble in our marriage? The idea of Nikki being involved with another man didn't make sense, but the evidence pointed that way. Tony had suspected it even before I did. Was Nikki having an affair? Did her lover shoot me? The thought that she waited 8 minutes before calling emergency haunted me. Was she hoping I wouldn't survive? I struggled to reconcile the loving wife I knew with what might have happened. It scared me that I might never know the full truth. I wiped away tears as Jim poked his head in. "Eric, we're leaving. You said you'd call Nikki's dad, right?" "Yeah, I'll call him soon," I replied. After Jim and Nikki left, I braced myself for the difficult conversation ahead. I called her father, George, and explained the situation, asking him to be there for her. George was shocked, insisting Nikki couldn't be involved, but I told him she'd be staying with him and Mary for a while. After the call, I sat at my desk, overwhelmed by everything. Thoughts raced through my mind. Did Nikki plan this? How long had the affair been going on? The idea that her lover shot me kept repeating in my head. To calm down, I took a painkiller and managed to fall asleep. The next morning, I felt lost. I was angry at Nikki, but missed her at the same time. The phone rang several times. Calls from her school, her mother, and some that left no messages. I wondered if one of the calls could have been from her lover. At 5 p.m., Tony called. I picked up and he asked how I was doing. After some small talk, he came over for a drink. Tony told me Nikki had cooperated with the police and was questioned for 2 hours before being released. He also revealed that they had identified the shooter but were waiting to arrest him when he returned from out of state. They didn't want to tip him off by arresting him too soon. While I felt some relief knowing the shooter had been identified, it hurt knowing they got the information from Nikki. Tony couldn't tell me more about her involvement, but the fact that she knew the shooter confirmed my worst fears. As we sat there, Tony suggested I get away for a while, maybe to the beach or Vegas. I agreed it was a good idea. "I'll call you if anything important comes up," Tony assured me before leaving. I decided a change of scenery might be exactly what I needed. Tony stayed for another hour just talking. At first, I thought he was fishing for information, but he genuinely wanted to chat. Before leaving, he took my cell number and asked me to let him know where I'd be staying. After he left, I considered where to go. Hawaii sounded great, but I didn't feel up for a long flight. Most places seemed either too far or not far enough. By the time I went to bed, I hadn't decided. Friday morning, I called my office. Everything was running smoothly without me, which was both a relief and a disappointment. My boss, Charlie, told me not to worry and to come back whenever I was ready. He asked how Nikki was coping, but I didn't mention her involvement in the shooting. Charlie suggested I go to Vegas to unwind, and when I hesitated, he offered his house there. He hadn't used it in a while and asked if I could check on it while I stayed. He even said I could use the old Honda in the garage and asked if I'd restock the fridge with some Heineken for his next visit. I accepted the offer, booked my flight for the next morning, and called Nikki's parents to let them know she could stop by the house for her things. Mary, her mom, begged me to talk to Nikki, but I couldn't. I was too angry. When Mary suggested we could work things out, I snapped, reminding her that Nikki's lover had shot me. After hanging up, I felt ashamed for how I'd spoken to her, but still didn't see how things could improve between Nikki and me. That evening, Charlie dropped off the keys to the Vegas house. When he mentioned that I'd like it, I awkwardly explained that Nikki wasn't coming. I asked him to keep my trip private, and he agreed. I called Tony to tell him about my Vegas plans. He warned me not to tell anyone where I was going until the shooter was in custody. Tony was still uneasy about the delay in arresting him and didn't want to take any risks. He also advised me not to talk to Nikki until things were sorted out. As we wrapped up the conversation, Tony mentioned that the ADA would question Nikki again soon and asked if I had anything that could help. I couldn't think of anything useful. Nikki had never given me any reason to suspect her before all this. Tony reassured me, reminding me that I needed to stay strong for what was coming next. Before he left, we acknowledged that we'd become friends through this ordeal, and despite everything, I appreciated having him on my side. We parted on a light note, joking about how having a cop as a friend might come in handy. After the conversation with Tony, I packed for my trip, keeping it light since I wasn't strong enough to carry heavy luggage. I packed a small bag with mostly socks, underwear, 3 pairs of pants, shorts, and 6 shirts. Since Charlie's house had a washer and dryer, I didn't need much, and if I needed anything else, I could buy it in Vegas. By 10:30 a.m. Saturday, I was in a cab heading west on Charleston Boulevard in 101-degree heat. Charlie had called his house small, but at 3,500 square feet, it was more elegant than I expected. It had white stucco, a red tile roof, and a grand entrance with red oak double doors and stained glass windows. Inside, everything was high-tech, with a smart home system controlling the air conditioning, security cameras, and more. The house lifted my spirits briefly. I thought, Nikki would love this. But the sadness and anger returned. I was here alone because of her. To distract myself, I decided to start the Honda in the garage and go grocery shopping. The car, though old, was in great condition and started right away. I remembered a nearby shopping center and bought enough food, drinks, and beer for a week. By the time I got back, I was exhausted, but managed to put the groceries away and eat a sandwich. I changed into swim trunks, checked my scars in the mirror, and felt self-conscious about them. To avoid the neighbors seeing them, I put on a shirt before heading outside, but the heat drove me into the pool anyway. After cooling off, I lay down on a lounge chair, nearly asleep, when my phone rang. "Eric," said the voice on the other end. "Hey, Tony, what's up?" I replied. "Good. I need to ask you a few questions if you don't mind." "Sure, go ahead," I said, a bit surprised he had more questions. "Tell me about Sarah Bowden," Tony asked. "Sarah Bowden? What does she have to do with this?" I responded, confused. "I was hoping you could tell me," Tony said. "She's a girl I knew in college." "You dated her?" Tony continued. "Yeah, we went out 3 or 4 times." "Did you have sex with her?" Tony asked bluntly. I felt irritation creeping in. "What's this about?" "It's just part of the investigation, so did you?" "No," I said firmly. "Is that why you stopped dating her? Because she didn't want to?" Tony pressed further. "No, it wasn't like that. We just realized it wasn't going anywhere, so we stopped seeing each other." "Did you stay in touch after that?" he asked. "We did for a bit, but nothing serious," I answered. "Why are you asking about someone I dated over 10 years ago?" I asked, frustration building. "Something came up in the investigation that I need to follow up on," Tony explained. "Were you dating your wife at that time?" he asked. "No, I hadn't met Nikki yet," I clarified. "Okay, tell me more about how you met Sarah," Tony urged. I took a deep breath, recalling the memory. "It was a Saturday night. I was getting gas when a car pulled up with a guy yelling at a girl. When I went inside to pay, the guy followed me. While he was inside, the girl got out and asked me to take her with me. She had a bruise on her face, so I told her to get in. We went to a Denny's and talked. She said the guy wasn't her boyfriend, just someone she had gone out with twice, and he'd hit her earlier that night." "Do you know who the guy was?" Tony asked. "No, I don't remember if she ever told me his name," I said. "Is there anything else you can tell me about Sarah?" Tony asked, pressing for more information. "No, I haven't heard anything about her since college," I replied, then paused as something resurfaced in my mind. "Wait, Nikki asked me about her a year ago." "Why did Nikki ask?" Tony asked, sounding curious. "I don't know, it was right after she got back from Germany. She just asked if I knew Sarah Bowden." "And what did you tell her?" Tony asked. "I told her the truth, that I knew her from college." "Did Nikki say why she was asking?" he continued. "She said someone told her to ask, but she didn't say who." "Why was Nikki in Germany?" Tony asked. "She was chaperoning a school trip," I answered. "Who else was on the trip?" Tony pressed. I listed the other teachers and chaperones, and I noticed Tony's expression shift slightly. "Why didn't you go?" he asked. "I had to cancel because of a work conference in Denver." "Did Nikki ever mention Sarah again?" Tony asked. "No." "That's it then?" Tony asked, his voice calm. "Yes, I hope so," I replied, feeling uneasy. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, picking up on his tone. "I don't know if Sarah Bowden is involved, but it's a lead I need to follow," Tony said. "I hope you've told me everything." Frustrated, I replied, "Are you suggesting I'm hiding something? I thought we were friends." "Eric, I *am* your friend, but I'm also a cop, and I have to do my job," Tony said firmly. "Someone's trying to drag Sarah into this mess, and I don't see how she fits," I muttered. The rest of the weekend, I tried to relax, swimming, reading, and clearing my head. But Tony's questions about Sarah lingered. Why was she suddenly relevant? And what did Tony really suspect? On Monday, I decided to be more active. I walked 2 miles in the morning and swam laps in the afternoon, all while waiting for a call from Tony about my shooter being arrested. No call came. After lunch, I called Nikki's dad to check on her. "Hey, George, how's Nikki doing?" I asked. "Did you know she quit her job?" George replied, catching me off guard. "She quit? Why?" "She was worried rumors would spread. But I think there's more to it," he said. Nikki loved teaching, so hearing this filled me with sadness and frustration. "Tell her I'm sorry she had to quit," I said quietly before ending the call. I spent the rest of the day thinking about the odd questions Tony had asked me about Sarah Bowden, wondering how she was connected to this. By Wednesday morning, I still hadn't heard from Tony. Then Charlie called to check in. "How's the house?" he asked. "It's great, but it's bigger than you made it sound," I joked. After some light chat, Charlie got serious. A police detective came by this morning asking about you. My stomach dropped. What did he want? He wanted to know where you were. I told him, Charlie said. Realizing I hadn't told Tony the exact location, I reassured Charlie that it was okay. We wrapped up the conversation, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. That evening, I decided to head to Treasure Island Casino to distract myself. I played blackjack for a few hours and returned home around 9 p.m. I noticed a missed call and voicemail from Tony asking me to call back. I dialed him after finishing my sandwich. You wanted me to call? I asked. Where have you been? Tony snapped. I don't need to check in with you every hour, I replied, annoyed. Sorry, but we've got a problem. Our suspect didn't return from Denver. We lost him at LAX, Tony explained. I was stunned. So, the guy who shot me is still on the loose? Yeah, and we don't know if he knows we're looking for him, Tony said. Do you think Nikki tipped him off? I asked, feeling uneasy. We don't think so, but we're keeping an eye on her. How are you holding up? Tony asked. I'd feel better if you focused on catching him instead of asking about my past, I said, still irritated. Eric, you need to get out of that house, right now, Tony said suddenly, his tone urgent. Why? Do you think he's coming here? It's possible. He could already be there, Tony warned. I froze. Who is this guy? John Parker, Tony revealed after a pause. Nikki's gym teacher? I don't really know him, I said, shocked. There's more to their relationship than we know. We're still figuring it out, Tony said. Did Nikki tell you anything? I asked, fearing the worst. I can't share that yet, but you need to leave the house now. Call me once you're safe, Tony insisted. Realizing the flight from LA to Vegas only took an hour, I glanced around the dark house and agreed. Okay, I'm leaving, I said, hanging up. I closed my phone and started turning off the lights, leaving the house completely dark. I cautiously looked out the windows, scanning for any suspicious cars or people. Seeing nothing, I still couldn't shake the feeling that John Parker might be nearby. Grabbing the keys to Charlie's Honda, I went into the garage. Sitting in the driver's seat, I took a moment to calm myself before opening the garage door. Once it was open enough, I quickly backed out and closed it behind me. As I drove 2 blocks away, I checked my rearview mirror, but no cars seemed to be following. Approaching Charleston Boulevard, I noticed a silver Ford Explorer with California plates turning onto the street where Charlie's house was. The timing seemed too coincidental, and I didn't want to take any chances. I turned onto the I-15 interchange and decided to head back to Los Angeles. If John Parker was after me, I wasn't going to make it easy. The Honda held up well, cruising between 75 and 80 miles per hour all the way to the I-10. By 2:30 a.m., I was in Burbank, checking into a small hotel near the airport. Sitting in the dim hotel room, I couldn't stop thinking. Was John Parker after me? Was he still in Vegas or already in LA? The questions swirled in my head, and I couldn't figure out why Parker would want to eliminate me. If he and Nikki were involved, why not just get a divorce? I sat there, exhausted but unable to sleep. In the morning, I called Tony and told him where I was, mentioning the car with California plates. What kind of car? Tony asked. A silver Ford Explorer, I replied. Tony's tone shifted. That's probably his. We found out Parker parked his Explorer at LAX before flying to Denver. He was seen leaving the lot Sunday night. So he's back in LA? I asked. Yes, we think so. Where are you? I'm at a hotel in Burbank, room 254, I said. 45 minutes later, Tony knocked on my door. He came in, opened his briefcase, and handed me a photo. Do you recognize him? Tony asked. I looked at the grainy image of a man with dark hair in the driver's seat of a car. He looked large but unfamiliar. Is that John Parker? I asked. Yes, Tony confirmed. I don't recognize him, I said. Tony then pulled out a videotape and placed it on the table. You're not supposed to see this yet, but I thought you should. Don't tell anyone. What's on it? I asked, feeling uneasy. You'll see, Tony said, leaving soon after. I called the front desk and asked for a VCR. When it arrived, I set it up and hesitated before pressing play. After a few moments of static, the screen showed Nikki and Jim sitting at a table in a gray room. Nikki's face was blank, her hands on the table. I recognized her outfit. It was from the night she left with Jim. This must have been recorded then. After a moment, the door to the left opened and a man in gray slacks and a white shirt entered. Good evening, Mrs. Anderson. I'm Detective Harris, and I'll be conducting this interview. Before we start, do you need water or a bathroom break? No, I'm fine, Nikki replied in a weak monotone. All right, let's begin, Harris said, settling into the chair across from her. I want to talk about the events on Friday, August 8th. Please answer honestly. Nikki gave a slight nod. Were you in the house when your husband was shot? Harris asked. Yes, Nikki responded quietly, her head lowered. Who shot your husband? It was an accident, she whispered. Who shot him? Harris asked again, his tone firm. John Parker, she admitted, and the name sent a chill down my spine. Who is John Parker? Harris pressed. He's the gym teacher at my school, Nikki explained, her voice barely above a whisper. Where were you when the shooting happened? Harris continued. I was hiding in the closet, Nikki replied. How do you know it was an accident if you were in the closet? Harris asked, his voice sharp. John told me, Nikki answered. Tell me what happened that day, Harris said, leaning forward. John and I were upstairs in my bedroom. When we heard the front door open, I panicked because Eric wasn't supposed to be home yet. I picked up the phone to call emergency, but John told me to be quiet and went to check. He came back and said someone was downstairs, then told me to hide in the closet. A minute or two later, I heard fire shots. I thought someone had shot John, and I was terrified. Then John opened the closet door, and he looked shaken. He mumbled, "It was an accident." I followed him, and he said he thought he saw a tool in Eric's hand, so he panicked and shot him. That's when I saw Eric lying at the bottom of the stairs. Nikki paused, her tears threatening to spill over. I told John to call emergency, but he said it was too late. Then he said we had to make it look like a robbery. While I was checking if Eric was still breathing, John started trashing the family room. I couldn't wait any longer and called emergency myself. I was put on hold, she said, her voice shaking. What was Parker doing while you were on the phone? Harris asked. He just stood there, warning me to stick to the story. He said that if the police came after him, I'd go down with him, Nikki recalled, her face pale. And what did Parker do next? Something strange. He leaned over Eric and whispered something. I think he said, "It's for Sarah," but I'm not sure, she admitted. Who do you think Sarah is? Harris asked. Maybe Sarah Bowden, a girl Eric dated in college. John once asked me if Eric knew her, Nikki explained, glancing up briefly. Detective Harris jotted down Sarah Bowden's name before refocusing on Nikki. Now, tell me about your relationship with John Parker. He's just a colleague, Nikki said, her tone growing defensive. Then why was he in your bedroom? Harris asked, his eyes narrowing. He followed me upstairs, Nikki admitted, her voice faltering again. Why was he at your house that day? Harris pressed. We had lunch with some teachers, and I went home to change after spilling sauce on my blouse. He drove with me, Nikki explained, her voice barely steady. So he followed you upstairs? Harris asked, pushing for clarity. Yes, but only because he was carrying a beer mug he bought for me in Germany, she responded. Why bring the mug upstairs? Harris asked, clearly confused. He said it was to remind me of something from Germany. He tried to seduce me, Nikki confessed, her tears finally breaking free. Did you have sex with him? Harris asked, his voice firm. No, I didn't, Nikki replied, her tone resolute. Was that because your husband came home and interrupted? Harris asked, leaning in. No, Nikki insisted, shaking her head. Then why did Parker think you would agree? Harris pressed. He kept bringing up Germany, trying to convince me, trying to manipulate me, Nikki replied, her voice cracking. Was there any reason he thought you would? Harris asked, his tone becoming sharper. Nikki was visibly upset, and her lawyer, Jim, tried to comfort her as Harris continued his interrogation. In just a couple of seconds, I realized it was an earthquake. I quickly stepped back to the bathroom doorway, bracing myself. It felt strong, maybe a magnitude 6. The large window cracked and flew out, landing in the parking lot below. The power went out moments later. It all lasted under 30 seconds, but the sounds of sirens and car alarms soon echoed throughout the city. I waited for the power to return, but as the darkness deepened, I unplugged the VCR and took it to the front desk. My tape's stuck. Can I borrow the VCR and return it tomorrow? I asked. The clerk pointed to a lit area. We have a generator. You can use the outlets to get your tape out. 5 minutes later, I had the tape and was driving home. I called Tony. I'm heading to the house. The power's out here too, I said. Good. I need to talk to you. I'll meet you there in 30 minutes, Tony replied. The house was pitch dark when I arrived. I turned off the car's headlights, grabbed the videotape, and stumbled toward the front door. It was so dark I could barely see, tripping a few times. At the door, I knelt to find the keyhole by feel, mumbling to myself, I can't see a thing. Oddly, closing my eyes helped, and I managed to unlock the door. Inside it was even darker. I knew the flashlight was in the kitchen pantry, so I moved slowly along the walls, trying to reach it. Suddenly, something felt off. I froze. There was a strange odor, sweat and whiskey. "Someone's here," I whispered. Fear gripped me. Could it be Parker? My mind raced. If it was, he'd used the power outage to sneak in. I had to get the flashlight. Moving slowly and quietly, I inched my way toward the pantry. When I finally reached it, relief washed over me. But just as I reached for the door, I felt a warm breath on my face. "Hey, Eric," Parker's voice growled, inches from me. My whole body tensed, his sour breath reeked of whiskey. Without thinking, I shoved him and stepped aside. He staggered, caught off guard, and a fire shot rang out, the flash blinding me and the sound deafening. I managed to slip inside the pantry as more fire shots followed. Frantically, I found the flashlight on the top shelf, clutching it tightly as I hid in the corner. "Eric, why are you making this hard?" Parker taunted. "I've waited a long time for this. Just face it like a man." I stayed quiet, trying to control my anger as he continued mocking me. "Nicole and I will celebrate your pass away," he sneered. Rage surged, but I knew I had to stay in control. Then in a calmer voice, Parker added, "You know, Nicole came to my hotel in Germany. She wanted me." His words stung, but I held my composure. Parker leaned against the pantry door. "Eric, where are you?" he called out mockingly. "She wanted me to eliminate you so we could be together." That was the final straw. I charged at the door, knocking Parker forward. We crashed into the dining room table, both struggling for control. I managed to lock his right arm down, forgetting he was left-handed. Suddenly, his left elbow slammed into my side, sending waves of pain through me. I swung the flashlight blindly, striking him hard. He screamed in pain as the flashlight slipped from my hand, rolling across the floor. Parker groaned, but didn't stay down. He hissed through clenched teeth. "You're going to pay for this, Eric." Grabbing my phone, I quickly called Tony. "Parker's here. Hurry," I shouted. Parker sneered. "Help won't come in time. Nicole and I will be laughing in Rio." An idea hit me. I whispered, "Sarah told me she didn't want you because you were terrible in bed." "Shut up about Sarah!" Parker exploded. The room plunged into darkness again as the phone's light went out. Parker made his move, throwing me across the room and scrambling to find his tool. I stayed low, knowing the next shot would eliminate me. Suddenly, the room filled with bright police flashlights. Parker raised his tool, but before he could fire, 3 shots rang out, and he slumped to the ground. Officers rushed in, disarming him. "He's alive," one officer confirmed. Tony rushed over. "You all right?" he asked. "Yeah, thanks for saving me." "Who shot him?" I asked, still in shock. "All of us," Tony replied. By the time Parker was taken away in the ambulance, I had already explained what happened to 3 different detectives, each reminding me how lucky I was, as if I didn't already know. Most of the police had left, and Tony and I sat in the family room. "I don't get why Parker decided to liquidate me," I said, still shaken. Tony thought for a moment. "It was an obsession. He felt you took something that belonged to him and wanted revenge." "It wasn't about Nikki, was it?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. "No," Tony confirmed. "He used her to get to you." "Was it Sarah Bowden?" Tony nodded gravely. "Yes, her name came up during Nikki's interrogation, so I tracked her down. She's married now and living in Phoenix. I spoke to her before coming here." "What did she say?" I asked, feeling a sense of unease. Tony sighed. "She confirmed she knew you and told me the same story you did, about dating briefly. Then I asked her about Parker. She hesitated before telling me that John was the guy she was with the night you met her at the gas station. After that night, they didn't see each other for months, but eventually he contacted her. He apologized and asked to talk. Unfortunately, she made the mistake of letting him into her apartment. At first, he was polite, but then he got angry and told her she belonged to him. When she tried to call the police, he threatened her, saying that if he ever saw her with someone else, he'd liquidate them both. I absorbed the weight of Tony's words. And she didn't think it applied to me. She wasn't seeing anyone at the time, so she didn't think it was directed at you, Tony explained. And she moved to Phoenix after that. Yes, she left school hoping he wouldn't find her, Tony said. I let out a slow exhale. And she's safe now? As far as I know, yes, Tony replied. I stared at the floor, processing everything. What about Parker? Will he survive? Tony's expression turned serious. His chances are slim. He was already in a coma when they took him. I didn't know how to feel. Maybe relieved, but definitely not happy. Tony interrupted my thoughts. Sorry, but your house is a crime scene again. You'll need to leave everything as it is for now, but it shouldn't take long. Internal Affairs will be here tomorrow since officers were involved in the shooting." "Do I have to leave?" I asked, dreading the idea of finding a hotel. "No, just don't touch anything in the kitchen. You'll probably get your house back by noon tomorrow," Tony assured me. "Did you finish watching the video?" he asked, referring to the footage he'd given me. "No, the earthquake interrupted me," I replied. Tony chuckled softly. "Right, I forgot about that. Just don't tell anyone I gave you a copy. When you're done, get rid of it." I looked at him, feeling the weight of the situation settle in. "What's going to happen to Nikki?" Tony sighed deeply. "I don't know. That's up to the prosecutor. If she told the truth, maybe she won't be charged." We stood up, and Tony reached for his coat. "I'll let you know if I hear anything more about your wife." "Thanks, Tony. I owe you a whiskey," I said, attempting a small smile. "At least 2, he grinned before walking out the door. Alone in the family room, Parker's words echoed in my mind. Could any of it be true? Nikki had mentioned the beer glass from Germany, but had she been involved with him? I wanted to believe otherwise, but doubts crept in. Too exhausted to watch the rest of the video, I decided to sleep. My dreams were restless, filled with the chaos of the past few weeks. The next morning, the doorbell woke me. 2 men in brown suits introduced themselves as detectives from Internal Affairs. "We're here to inspect the scene of the shooting," one of them said. "Has anything been touched in the kitchen?" "No," I replied. After recounting the events once more, they inspected the scene while I took a shower. When I returned, they were finishing up. "You can clean up now," one of them said before leaving. I called a cleaning service, but they wouldn't arrive until Monday. That was fine. I needed time to think. Around 11, the power came back on. I sat down to watch the rest of Nikki's interview, but the videotape was gone. I searched everywhere, even checking my car, but couldn't find it. Panic set in. Had I dropped it when I pushed Parker? Maybe Internal Affairs had taken it, thinking it was evidence. I realized I needed to warn Tony just in case. The rest of the day felt empty. Without the tape, I didn't know what to do. The house was quiet and I felt completely alone. Despite everything, I couldn't stop thinking about Nikki. Could we move past this? That evening, Tony stopped by. After pouring us both drinks, he told me Parker had died that afternoon. I wasn't sure how to react. Relief, maybe, but uncertainty lingered. Tony continued. The ADA isn't pressing charges against Nikki. She cooperated fully, passed a polygraph, and they believe she told the truth. I nodded, though I still didn't know what I would do about Nikki. Tony stood up to leave. Take your time, but don't punish her for something that wasn't her fault. The next morning, I drove to Nikki's parents' house. George greeted me warmly, and inside I found Nikki looking exhausted and tearful. I was so worried, she said, her voice breaking. I'm sorry, I said. I wasn't ready to talk yesterday. Did you know Parker died? I asked quietly. Nikki nodded, her tears flowing freely. I'm not crying for him, Eric. I'm crying for what he did to us. Before I could respond, Mary spoke up. Eric, the district attorney's office called yesterday. They said they're not pressing charges against Nikki. I nodded and glanced at Nikki. Yeah, I heard. That's good news, right? Mary asked hopefully. It is, I agreed. But I wasn't sure what it meant for us. Nikki walked over to me and asked quietly, Can I go home with you? I shook my head, feeling torn. No, I'm not going home right now. She looked confused. Where are you going? I have to take Charlie's car to Las Vegas, I replied. Nikki blinked. But Charlie lives in Sherman Oaks. Why do you need to take his car to Vegas? I cupped her face gently and looked into her eyes. I'll explain everything on the way. I want you to come with me. Nikki wiped her tears and hugged me tightly. I turned to her father. George, I need a favor. Some cleaners are coming to the house on Monday. Can you let them in? Of course, George said. What time? Around noon, I said. Nikki and I should get going. As we left, Nikki said, We need to stop by the house so I can pack. I already packed what you'll need, I replied. She looked surprised. So you knew you'd be taking me with you? You're my wife. Why would I leave without you? I kissed her forehead. For the first 45 minutes of the drive, Nikki was quiet. Then she asked, Did you really pack all my clothes? I packed the essentials, underwear, sandals, heels, and that black dress you like. We can buy anything else, I said. She smiled and kissed my cheek, and we started talking like we used to. But after a while, I noticed Nikki grew somber. What's wrong? I asked. Eric, I'm sorry for everything. I want you to know I love you and that nothing happened between John and me. I just hope you don't lose trust in me because of this. Please ask me anything. I'll tell you the truth." I paused, then asked, "Did you break the beer glass?" Nikki looked confused, but nodded. "Yes, I did." "I already figured that out," I said. Nikki looked relieved. "I love you, Eric. I trust you, and I just want to move forward. Let's spend these next few days together without worrying about anything." When we arrived at Charlie's house in Vegas, Nikki said, "This is much better than staying on the Strip." We spent the day lounging by the pool, and Nikki made a simple but romantic dinner. It felt like we were reconnecting, but I knew readers might wonder how I could trust her again. After the investigators left the house on Friday, I found a videotape in the pantry, which turned out to be Nikki's police interview. I watched the part where Detective Harris asked about John Parker trying to seduce her. Nikki explained that they were in Germany as chaperones, and on the last day of the trip, John gave her the beer mug she had admired. He said it was a thank you, and even though she knew she shouldn't accept it, she did, because she thought I'd like it. Later, after a night of drinking, John kissed her, and for a moment, she kissed him back. Realizing her mistake, she pushed him away and told him it was inappropriate. She ended it right there. That was the truth I needed to hear. "Did Mr. Parker leave you alone after that?" Detective Harris asked, his voice steady. "Pretty much. The next day he apologized and blamed it on drinking too much the night before. After that he behaved," Nikki replied quietly. "So you didn't have sex with Mr. Parker?" Harris pressed. "No, I love my husband and would never cheat on him," Nikki said firmly. "When you got home, what did you tell your husband about the beer mug Mr. Parker gave you?" Harris continued. "I didn't tell Eric it was from John. I said I bought it myself. When Eric loved the mug, I felt guilty for lying and almost told him the truth, but I didn't," she admitted. "Did Mr. Parker ever ask you to have an affair after that trip?" Harris asked. "He flirted sometimes, but he never crossed a major line, at least not until the day of the shooting," Nikki responded, her voice trembling. "Why do you call it an accident? Mr. Parker deliberately shot your husband," Harris said, his tone hardening. "No, I don't believe he would have done that on purpose," Nikki said, tears welling up as she began to sob. "Mrs. Anderson, did you hear gunshots when you were hiding in the closet?" Harris asked, pressing further. "Yes," she whispered. "Can you describe what you heard?" "The first shot was loud, and then there were two quieter shots after a pause," Nikki said, her voice shaking. "Do you know why there was a delay between the shots?" Harris asked, his brow furrowing. "No, I never thought about it," she replied, shaking her head. "Mr. Parker shot your husband in the chest, then came down the stairs and shot him 2 more times. It's clear he wanted your husband dead," Harris stated bluntly. Nikki broke down, and Jim reached out to comfort her. After a brief pause, Harris continued. "Can you think of any reason why Mr. Parker would want to kill your husband?" Nikki shook her head, her voice barely audible. "I don't understand why he'd do it." "Is there anything else that might explain why he shot your husband?" Harris asked, his tone probing. Nikki hesitated, then said, "Maybe it has to do with Sarah Bowden." "Why do you think that?" Harris asked, leaning in slightly. "While we were in Germany, John asked me to ask Eric if he remembered Sarah Bowden, but he didn't explain why," Nikki replied. "Did you ask your husband about her?" "Yes, Eric said he knew her briefly in college." "Did you tell your husband that Mr. Parker asked about her?" Harris pressed further. "No," Nikki admitted. "Why not?" Harris asked, his eyes narrowing. "I don't know," she answered, looking down. "Did you see Mr. Parker after the shooting?" Harris asked, shifting the conversation. "Yes, at the hospital once. He said he needed to talk to me and check on Eric," Nikki said, her voice soft. "And what did he want to talk about?" Harris inquired. "He wanted to make sure I didn't tell anyone what really happened," Nikki confessed, her voice cracking as she spoke. Detective Harris ended the interview, and Nikki left with Jim. As I finished watching the tape, I still had doubts about Nikki. Later that evening, Tony came over and told me the DA wasn't pressing charges. I asked why, and Tony explained that Nikki had passed a polygraph test, confirming her truthfulness. Nikki hadn't had an affair with Parker, and the beer mug was Parker's misguided attempt to pursue her. When I found out that Nikki had broken the mug, it made sense. She probably smashed it because it reminded her of the guilt she felt over the situation. That was the final piece of the puzzle I needed. If Nikki broke the glass, I could move forward. If Parker had done it, my doubts would remain.